Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. This is episode 7 in the series on debunking Gladwell's analysis of Amanda Knox. It's also the final episode in the series. Never fear, at the end of the series we'll be doing another series, but a much shorter series in terms of time. We'll be covering the timeline of Amanda Knox 12 years ago today for the next approximately 10 days. So from now till the end of the month. And we'll be doing I'll be doing episodes on that on a daily basis, going through the timeline, contextualizing and so on. We've already missed quite a lot. I have covered some of it in the debunking episodes, but if you're interested, you can go to the hashtag 12 years ago today MK and go back to approximately mid-September, and you can then read through a summary of the timeline. Make sure when you do click on the hashtag to go to latest and then just to scroll down, and that'll take you to down the timeline. Right. For now though, we're going to deal with the last episode of the series, and it's the end of the chapter that Gladwell wrote, where he ends off saying, quoting Amanda Knox saying, "Look into my eyes, they're not objective evidence." Pretty incredible thing for him to say. I've actually written 2 trilogies on Amanda Knox, and the focus on the cover of I'd say 5 of the books is to look in Amanda Knox's eyes. There are actually quite a few photos where when you look into her eyes you see something or you don't see something. Interestingly, one of the title images, the sort of movie poster images of the Netflix documentary, is a sort of a close-up shot of Amanda Knox's eyes. They sort of look as though they're sort of tilted upward, and so they look as though they're sort of fearful. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. What's quite interesting is very recently, as recently as yesterday, October 25th, a psychotherapist published an article on kind of a review on talking to strangers, and he sort of subtitled his review, "Can a book be simultaneously riveting and wrong?" So there have been quite a few sort of independent reviewers who've taken Gladwell to task on his book, just certain areas that they've found fault with. I must say, what has been staggering, doing this series, is that the chapter on Amanda Knox from a true crime perspective, how flawed it is from beginning to end. It's like it's not like he got one little piece of it wrong, one little paragraph. It is from the beginning to the end. It is through and through. It is rotten. It's like a really rotten piece of cheese stinking in Denmark so badly that you can smell it all over the world, kind of thing. It really is shoddy. It's really, really shoddy work. And when I originally read it, I was so appalled that I thought this needs to be ripped to shreds, and that's what I've endeavored to do. To be honest, as much as I've gone into it and I've tried to ridicule and invalidate and undermine and just use facts to fault find with this particular version of events, there was so much more that I could actually have done. I could have written a book just um, on how shitty this chapter was, and just, literally taken each sentence and kind of unscrambled it and dealt with all the little permutations. I could have done that, but I think it suffices to say that the analysis is shocking. It's shockingly sort of paltry. It's like, as I've said from the beginning, it is like Gladwell watched an episode of a documentary, maybe the Netflix documentary, and then he, in one evening, just sort of cobbled together what he cobbled together. I don't know how he wrote this, but it just seems like his insight and his background was either completely, what's the word, pieced together with the apologists. It just seems like he had a massive critical thinking failure here, or that he simply, he didn't seem to apply any of his own crystal clear thinking tools to this himself. And we'll get to the section, but there's a part in the chapter where he says the Amanda Knox story really deserves a full narrative. I would love him to do that. I would love him to I don't know, like, try to unravel the whole story and then see what he comes up with. Either whether he has a change of heart or a change of mind, or whether he actually sticks to his guns and I don't know, just somehow turns this sort of massive white elephant into like a massive brontosaurus, so before we get into the specific aspects of the chapter, I just want to quickly dip into the timeline, and I think that's quite important to do. The problem you have with Gladwell is he sort of sips from the gauntlet of the Amanda Knox case very selectively. It's a little sip here and a little sip there, and what he doesn't do is he doesn't seem to sort of check into the reality of it. And I know what people will say. Well, what is reality? You can say your reality is that, whatever. Well, there are things that are part of the definitive narrative, put it that way. There are things that people wouldn't necessarily have made up because it was agreed upon by several people. One thing that I think everyone can agree on is the day that Knox said that she met Celeste, and the day that Celeste said that he met Knox, and Meredith was actually a witness to that. So isn't that reality? Can we agree on that? And so even like a hinge like that in time, Gladwell doesn't acknowledge. He doesn't acknowledge when Knox met Celeste for the first time, and that a week later Meredith was dead. He doesn't go into who Celeste was very much, and I think that's pretty interesting. If we go to that particular date, which is pretty much right where we are now, 12 years ago today, it's heading into the weekend, and Knox tags along with Meredith to a concert, and Meredith leaves early, and then she meets this Italian dude and at this concert, and then from there she goes to work. She goes to work at Le Chic, and she suggests to Celeste to meet her there. And after the concert, Celeste asks for a number, and according to her memoir, Knox implies that she doesn't give it to him. But how would he find her at Le Chic if she didn't? In any event, at Le Chic, Celeste encounters Amanda Knox's co-worker Uwe. So the very first experience Celeste has of Knox is of other guys, and he's told that Juve, Amanda Knox's co-worker, latches onto every girl in sight. And what that implies is that quite a few things. It implies that Celeste, when he kind of is having this extended first date with Knox, is already concerned. He's concerned with who she's seeing and who her male friends are. And that happened to be a concern of Meredith as well. And we see quite a lot of interaction between Juve and Amanda, where Amanda goes to Juve's home. There are lots of calls between them, and so if Juve latched onto every girl in sight, did he not latch onto Amanda Knox? And you can let that go, and you can say, yeah, well, anyone can do what they want. But this is a situation of you've got to compare Meredith Kircher and her approach to relationships to Amanda Knox and her approach. Now, in hindsight, where we are today, Amanda's story is that she had this wonderful romance with Solicitor. She fell in love, and it was this beautiful, loving romance. It was sort of like some kind of summer romance in Italy. And yet, when you actually go into it, it's not quite as romantic. Well, certainly for Solicitor, who's already suspicious that is she involved with other guys. And if you've been following the series, that suspicion has been going on throughout. And so you can imagine the uncertainty and the insecurity and the anxiety and the agitation that there might have been with Solicitor, if that was the tone of the relationship, is that he's with this girl, but he can't really trust what she's saying. He can't really rely on her. Is she definitely with him or not? And again, this is mirrored in Meredith's situation, where she's also struggling to get Knox on the same page as her. How many guys are you going to bring home? All this kind of thing. And it's fine to be promiscuous, and it's fine to bring guys home, but if someone is in a relationship with someone else, I'm talking about, say, Meredith's in a relationship with some guy downstairs, then there is an impact in someone bringing various guys home. There's an impact on your intimacy and the quality of your intimacy. There's also the reverse situation. How does it reflect on you? How does their relationship, this warm, intimate thing, reflect on your shallow sort of, I'm in this relationship now, or I'm in this little fling now, and I'm in that one. I think most people will agree that it's nice to be in a mutually loving, meaningful relationship. And Meredith had that. Knox didn't. And Knox is saying in her version of events that Solicitor was that. Through Solicitor, she was having this serious, meaningful relationship. And I would put some doubt in that from both sides. I don't know whether it was that meaningful for him, and I don't know if it was that meaningful for her. One can say, yes, they were involved for a number of days, but were they exclusively involved? That's another question. And when we deal with the timeline in the next series, 12 years ago today, the 12 years ago today series, we'll see whether that, just how meaningful or meaningless that relationship was, and does all come to a head at around Halloween as it was in 2007. So another aspect just to address here as well is, besides encountering Juve at Le Chic, who Celeste says latches onto every girl in sight, Celeste describes himself as dog-tired and looking a mess after writing his final undergrad exam the night he met Knox. So it's not, Celeste isn't on his best day that particular day. He's tired, he looks a mess, he's kind of mentally exhausted, and under these circumstances he meets Knox, and I think that is quite interesting, is that you can also look at that and say, Celeste's lying. He didn't look terrible. He looked wonderful. Why would he lie about that? Like, why would he lie about? And another thing, he's a student. Why would he lie about writing his final undergrad exam that night? Because all his other friends would know that. So it's not something you would. But I know how a lot of the apologists for Amanda Knox act. Is virtually everything you say they want proof of, and then what they say they kind of either have no proof of, or it's an extraordinary claim. Like, there's no proof that there's DNA. In other words, it's all about proof, but it's almost like this race where there's just no proof anywhere. And so your whole argument is that there's just no proof about anything. It's almost like Amanda Knox was never in Italy, and nothing happened. It's just a strange, crazy event that happened. That's kind of their attitude, and that's it's totally unrealistic. It's as unrealistic, excuse me, as the previous episode about the name Foxy Knox had absolutely nothing to do with sex. I mean, it's that brain fart where you suddenly don't have any common sense, and you don't link things to reality. And anyone can play that game where you now can't link anything to reality, and can you please prove to me every little thing? Well, it's quite simple. Go to their own narratives and cross-reference their own narratives, and then you start getting versions of events which certainly add up to interesting things. At 10:53 the next day, this is the day after Knox meets Celeste, she makes her first call to Celeste. She calls him, and the call is presumably from the university, and it lasts 4 minutes and 12 seconds. At 21:23, so around about 10 hours later, Knox reaches out to Celeste again, this time via text and from the villa, from home. At this time, and context again is important, Celeste is working on his thesis, and he responds by phone 30 minutes later. So the fact that he responds not immediately shows that he's kind of got other things on his mind, right? He's not falling over himself to get back to Amanda. He's kind of got other things to attend to. On that same day, there are 5 more calls and text, and eight of them in all on the 26th. Of the 8 cell phone interactions between Knox and Celeste, 5 are from Knox to Celeste. Now, just bear in mind what we've been told about Knox through other people like Meredith, that Knox wants a lot of attention all the time, that she's often irritating, she's loud and all this kind of thing. And in this, just one day into her fling with Celeste, she's already knocking on his door and kind of calling him. And bear in mind, he's a proper university student. He's studying I think it's computer science or something, and he's writing exams and he's got stuff going on. She's sort of, I think she pretty much completed her language course, or she was very close to completing it, and she kind of has like an hour a day, and then you know, she's pretty much a free agent most of the time. So she's sort of hanging around looking for someone that she can hang out with, and most of the other students are proper students. They've got proper schedules, and they've got proper workloads to get through, and so on, and Knox doesn't, and she's feeling like a fifth wheel, and she's making herself a little bit useful excuse me, at the at Le Chic, and otherwise she's becoming a bit of a nuisance, and now she's becoming a bit of a nuisance to Celeste. And is she you know, does he want to does he appreciate her advances? Probably he does, probably he finds her less of a nuisance than Meredith does. But the fact is, she's got far more time on her hands than pretty much everyone around her. And so we see that the final call that Friday night at 22:58 was from Meredith to Amanda Knox, presumably asking her where Knox is and if she's safe. And what we know is that apparently on that very first meeting, Knox and Celeste slept together. And so you have a situation where even though Meredith and Knox have sort of had a falling out, Meredith is still mature enough to, she's returned from the concert and she's doing her own thing, and Knox hasn't come home, and she's sort of wondering, are you okay, right? Can you imagine Amanda Knox doing that? Can you imagine Amanda Knox contacting Meredith and saying, where are you? One doesn't really have that impression. One might say, yes, she would have done that, but if you actually look at the calls between her and Meredith, they dried up. There were no calls. And so I don't think that's fair to say. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's a fair statement to say that Knox cared about Meredith to the extent that Meredith was just mature and considerate towards Knox. Meredith invited Knox to the concert, and I think that's disputed. Where I think Knox claims that she invited Meredith to the concert. But you can go and look at Knox's profile, and nowhere does it list any interest in classical music. And it was actually a university event, so how would Knox have even known about it? But if it was something that Knox invited Meredith to, it would have been the first time that she had invited Meredith anywhere. Whereas Meredith had always invited Knox everywhere. It had been to a nightclub, or it had been to the chocolate festival, or it had been to this or to that. So why would that have changed here? So I don't. So I hope that's being clear. Then the other aspect is when Knox begins her fling with Celeste, very quickly it leads to her just basically moving in with him. And it doesn't quite work out that well, because what happens is she wakes up very early and then disturbs Celeste, and he mentions this in his memoir, that after one night it's not the end of the world, but if it's all the time, this person waking up early and putting music on and doing whatever, it was disturbing him. He's getting quite agitated by it. And so again, you have this impression that Knox can be quite irritating to be around, even if you like her, even if you're attracted to her. And what's also interesting is, and this addresses the possibility that Knox was seeing Juve, is that as soon as Knox shacks up with Celeste, so she basically sleeps with him, and then from then on she basically stays at his place. She sleeps at his place night after night after night. And from the moment that happens, her calls to Juve stop. Now, we've already seen that in his memoir, Celeste is not very happy when he sees Juve. He's not happy what he's heard about him. And we know that there's been quite a lot of interaction between Juve and Knox. So it's interesting that the moment that she's with Celeste, that stops, which seems to indicate either Celeste was aware of it, or that he told Amanda that he wasn't happy with it, and then Amanda obliged, or Amanda was just careful in terms of Juve. On the other hand, Knox stayed in regular contact with Spiros, and interestingly, from that time onwards, she didn't call home in Seattle. She didn't call home to say that she'd met this guy. She didn't call Laura or Philomena or Meredith between the 26th and before Halloween. So you've got this critical week, the last week of Meredith's life, and Knox is now with Celesta, and she doesn't reach out to anyone else. She doesn't say where she is. She doesn't say how she is. She stops communicating with Juve. She does continue with Spiros, but otherwise she's not really maintaining her friendships or relationships with other people, which does suggest that she doesn't have friendships or relationships with other people, doesn't it? I mean, to not contact someone and you've essentially moved out, doesn't that show that you know, and it's a brand new person? It's not as though she'd known Celeste for a while. She'd literally jumped ship, and she's now with him. And this brings us to Gladwell, and he refers to an interview that Knox did with Diane Sawyer, and the last exchange in the police station where Knox snapped at Kurtz's friend, and we dealt with that in the previous episode. But when Knox was asked to respond to this moment, which was seen by many as not her best moment, she said to Diane Sawyer, "Yeah, I was angry. I was angry." She said, "I was pacing and thinking about what Meredith must have been through." Just take those words. These are Amanda Knox's words. Just take those words again. I was angry, thinking about what Meredith must have been through. She didn't look angry. Now, when we actually see her with Celeste, she doesn't look angry. There's no anger in her gestures. She's not got her arms folded. She's not shaking her fist at the sky. She's not frowning. She doesn't appear angry. She appears something else. She appears maybe anxious and also kind of lovey-dovey. She doesn't appear angry. But yet I do think that there's some truth in that. I do think that Knox was angry. I don't think those words apply to where she said she fucking bled to death. I don't think it applies to that. I don't think it applies to that part so much. What I think it does apply to is I do think Amanda Knox was angry. I think she was angry with Meredith. I think Meredith was angry with her. I think there was a lot of enmity between them, and one of the big things was there was a Halloween party the night before the murder, and Meredith didn't invite Knox to it, and Meredith and all her friends went to it, and even Celeste didn't sort of go with Knox partying. He sort of went home and went back to study. And so Knox was essentially on her own on this party night, and that, I think, made her angry. So let's look at those words again. I was angry thinking about what Meredith must have been through. And I don't think that's what she really means. I think what she means is I was angry knowing what Meredith put me through, knowing what I went through with Meredith. Knowing that Meredith didn't like me seeing these guys, knowing that Meredith disapproved when I brought guys home, knowing that Meredith was sort of ratting on me to my roommates, telling me that I haven't done this, I haven't done that. I was angry that I wasn't feeling comfortable in my own home, so much so that I went and stayed with some other dude. I was angry. Not angry that Meredith has been murdered, and now I'm angry that she was murdered, by somebody else. Maybe I'm angry that I may have to move out of my home. Maybe I'm angry that will I be able to continue my studies? Maybe I'm angry that she's spoiled my relationship. She's interfered with my love life. Maybe I'm angry because, if I want to use certain substances, I don't want someone else getting in the way, interfering. Isn't that what she meant? And so if you go to the blog post that refers to this particular episode, I provided six parts, 6 clips that deal with the Diane Sawyer episode. You can go through that. You can get the anger statement in context and see whether you agree with it, see whether you believe it. But then Knox goes on, and this is again in the quoted text from Gladwell. She says, I think everyone's reaction to something horrible is different. And then Gladwell sort of almost high-fives her. She's right. Why can't someone be angry in response to a murder rather than sad? If you were Amanda Knox's friend, none of this would surprise you. So what he's saying here is, first of all, yes, everyone's reaction to something horrible is different, and then Gladwell high-fives her, saying, why can't she be angry? She's Meredith's closest friend. If you were Amanda's friend, would you be surprised by her anger? Why is it that when her housemate was murdered, Knox forgot to feel afraid? A murderer was on the loose, and she wanted to carry on studying as if nothing had happened. Why? Well, why would she want to continue studying? Because she was having the time of her life. She said that in her memoir. She said that many times. She was having a great time, and then the murder interrupted this good vibe, right? The reaction and the response from everyone, when I say everyone, I just mean generally the public, generally the media, generally the people speculating on this case, generally from law enforcement, was that Knox's reaction was odd. Everyone said that. The police said it, that the media said that, Meredith's friends said that, even Celeste said that Knox was a bit strange. I don't think it's strange for people in this situation to say, here is a crime scene, here's a little house, someone has died in that house, and the person who shared that house with her is the one that's the least affected by it. The person that should be the closest to the victim seems to be the least affected by her death. And you must try and explain to me how being angry adds up to someone sort of being lovey-dovey to someone. When someone is angry, when you are really, really angry, you don't want to be hugged or touched or comforted, or you would brush someone aside because you want to express your frustration. You're not vulnerable, you are prickly, right? And yet the image we get is, on the one hand we have Celeste sort of rubbing her back, embracing her, kissing her. At one point she's got her feet, I think, on his lap. They're making faces at one another. I'm not a psychologist, but that doesn't sound like someone who's angry, that kind of behavior. In fact, it's hard to see anywhere where her behavior is angry, except for that statement she makes about the throat being slit. It's difficult to see where Knox is being angry, although if you look carefully, her fingering her boss as a suspect doesn't seem like a thing that's innocent, or there seems some malicious intent there, isn't there? So I think there was anger, but I don't think it's in the way that Knox is saying. And when she says, I think everyone's reaction to something horrible is different, I think what we can also agree with is that when somebody dies, most people are able to show respect. Most people are able to be sober and be aware that something bad has happened. And yet Knox seems unaware. If you go through all the things that happened, the buying of the sexy underwear, the gymnastics in the police station, the whole history, you get, even Knox arriving at home and not seeing Meredith and seeing blood on the mat, the whole thing just speaks of someone who's just totally unaffected. Nothing affects her. She's just so goofy that nothing really bothers her. And yet we can see emotion from her when she's crying about herself, when she's on stage or being interviewed, and it's about how much she suffered. She's very capable of being very emotional about herself. She's very capable of laughing, smiling, singing, being giddy with sort of rapture when the attention's on herself. And that brings us to this other idea is, if it's true, and it does seem to be true, if it's true what Meredith said, that Knox craved constant attention, we get the same thing from Solicitor. But even if we just go through the last 12 years and we go to where we are now, Knox is still craving attention. Knox is still very much a kind of a public figure. In fact, very recently she tweeted something to Lady Gaga, which we'll get to later. She craves attention, and how does someone who craves attention deal with somebody else getting the attention that she wants? In the university setting, where there are many different boys, many different girls, and some boys are more in demand than others, and some of the girls are more in demand than others, how does someone who craves attention deal with someone else getting the attention she wants from a particular boy? And that's an important question. Doesn't it make you angry when you crave attention and you don't get it from the person that you want it from? And so Gladwell goes into the area where, while she was waiting to be interviewed by police, 4 days after Kurtz's body was discovered, Knox decided to stretch. Even that sentence is incorrect. That sentence is incorrect. Knox wasn't waiting to be interviewed. Knox was at the police station waiting for the interview with Solicitor to finish. That's why she was there. She wasn't waiting to be interviewed. Solicitor was summoned and Knox was tagging along. And so the way that Gladwell sketches this is that Knox is waiting to be interviewed, and while waiting she decides to stretch, and this behavior is strange. It is strange, but it's actually in the context of Knox is hanging around the police station and she's curious about what her boyfriend is being asked. A murder investigation is underway, and instead of just letting him go and deal with questions, and some of the questions are to do with her. Was she with him the whole night? And she would like to know what he's saying. Is he vouching for her? And as it happened, he wasn't. That night he said he can't say for sure that she was with him the whole night, and that led to him and her becoming suspects. What is she doing while this is going on? She's doing yoga, and what is that? What message is that sending? She's in the police station doing yoga while her boyfriend is being kind of questioned. Not her boyfriend. And the other police are walking around. And what is her doing yoga? What message is that conveying to everyone? Well, it's conveying a couple of things. If you cynical, you would say it's been 4 days since her friends died, and she's at a police station. She doesn't seem very concerned about her friend. Doesn't seem to be sort of at the counter trying to give them more information, trying to find out what have you found, and what progress is going on. Instead, she's sort of doing her own thing, and she's doing yoga. Now, somebody else would say what's going on there is she's actually trying to portray nonchalance. She's trying to show that she's got nothing to worry about, and this is how a person who's got nothing to worry about would act. And she's right. Someone who's maybe in a park or who's maybe at home might do that, but someone who's implicated in a police investigation wouldn't do that unless it was to try to show that they not that they shouldn't be under suspicion. And that in itself is odd behavior. And again, if you say Meredith was annoyed by her behavior, Celeste was annoyed by her behavior, her boss was annoyed by her flirting with customers at work, even the police were annoyed with her doing this under the circumstances. And so Gladwell's chapter refers to Rita Ficara, the cop who reprimanded Raffaele about kissing the day before, stepped out and demanded, "What are you doing?" And her face was full of contempt. Is there something wrong with that? Is there something wrong with you're a police officer and you investigating a high profile case? You've got everyone breathing down your neck. You've got people from the American consulate breathing down your neck. You've got people from the British consulate breathing down your neck. You've got Celesto, whose extended family are quite powerful, and his sister's a policewoman. You've even got at this point a at that point Knox hadn't identified Patrick Lumumba, but he was about to be identified. In any event, so at this point they have no definite suspects, but what they do have is some reason to believe that Knox and Celeste are persons of interest, and they were. I mean, they were at the crime scene before anybody else were. Both of them. They were at the crime scene when the police arrived. Both of them. So them being persons of interest was totally justified. Something else that I haven't even acknowledged in this timeline, but going back just a few days, is the fact that Rudy Gaudet was in the villa. This is going back 12 years ago today, just slightly over that, like 12 years in 1 day or 12 years in 2 days. Rudy Gaudet was in the villa, and he was there watching Formula 1. And I think it was Raikkonen who won or something. And he was there, and he actually said to the other guys, the other Italian guys, he said he wants to I think he said he wanted to sleep with Knox, or the Italian guys made a bet that he would, something like that. And so you already have the kind of mechanism for a kind of a love triangle between Knox, Celeste, and Rudy Gaudet. And Rudy Gaudet was found guilty of murder, and now this is the fact that he was interested in Knox. Now it certainly directs our attention to her. And if you were Celeste, you'd also be interested. If you were Celeste, you'd also want to know, is Knox interested in this guy? Is Knox interested in this guy who seems to be interested in her? Is Knox interested in this guy who has been hanging out at the apartment? Right? And so if we go back to the quote that Gladwell uses, and just paraphrasing it, she says, "I did a split in the police station while Celeste was being interrogated as a murder suspect. It felt good to still know I still could." It felt good to know I still could. So she's doing the splits in the police station, and she's feeling good about her gymnastic ability. She's feeling, that's what she's thinking about. What happened to the exhausting and abusive 53-hour police interrogation? What happened to the duress that she was under? She's talking about feeling good. She's got the space and the opportunity to do splits. The night before she was arrested, essentially the night of her arrest, but it was just after midnight. But so what happened to this exhausting sort of barrage of interrogation that she dealt with, that she's actually kind of enjoying herself? I mean, she uses the words, "it felt good that she could do the splits." And then we have Gladwell highlighting the fact that the lead investigator had doubts about Knox from the start. Oh, weren't they justified? Weren't the doubts that he had from Knox justified? This whole idea that you're going to now point out a particular person, retrospectively of course, and then say, you having formed your opinion about this particular individual, given what we know in hindsight, that she was ultimately acquitted after, essentially 4 separate judicial events, you can call them hearings, after 4 of them, wasn't some of the curiosity of the police justified? And what's being implied here is that this was a rush to judgment. The police rushed to implicate and charge Knox. As a matter of fact, it's almost like Knox was the last person charged, because they first interrogated Celeste, and it was only when she gave the version that she was at the villa with Patrick that she was fully implicated herself through making that statement, that the police didn't have any choice but to lay charges against her. But they only did that once she had implicated herself. What else were they supposed to do? And far from other people being responsible for sort of putting Knox in a bad light, it was really Knox herself that put herself in a bad light. And that's the interesting sort of inversion of the narrative that we sit with today, is that it's now everyone else is to blame, this officer and that one and that one and the media and that reporter and that journalist. Got nothing to do with Amanda Knox's behavior. And that kind of schizophrenia seems to have infected Gladwell. He seems to be also totally unaware that, if you look at Jodi Arias, in that case, friends of Travis told the detective to look into Jodi Arias. Weren't they justified? Were they wrong? Were they wrong, the friends who said, well, you know what, we've noticed this odd behavior from Jodi Arias, look into her. And what happened? They looked into her, and Jodi Arias was involved, and she was found guilty, and case closed. And it was friends who had an impression of Jodi Arias, and that impression was true. When Jodi Arias was in court, we saw that that impression was borne out in reality. In the Chris Watts case, friends of Shanann told the detective to look at Watts' phone to check the well site. Oh, weren't they justified? Were the friends also wrong in the way they looked at him and said, he's not acting right? That's what something the neighbor said. He's not acting right. Aren't they justified? So when people look at somebody else and they say, wow, you're not acting right, and it's not just friends, it's the police, it's the prosecutor, it's even the boyfriend, it's the murder victim. And you have the same thing with Shanann Watts, who said her husband wasn't the husband that she knew. He wasn't acting right. Is that do you just throw that away and say no, let's stick with the version we're getting from the person that's at the center of all of this? Let's take their word for it. Actually, a lot of the people who are not at the epicenter of the case, but around the center, close to the case, they are justified. And they are particularly justified when a lot of people are saying the same thing. You weren't acting right. And why is everybody else acting right? Why is everybody else acting in a way that's what you'd expect? They're grieving and so on. And not acting right, you have a situation like with the disappearance of Lacey Peterson. You have someone acting right, as in handing out flyers, in this case Scott Peterson. He's handing out flyers, but he doesn't want to make appeals to the media. He's reluctant. And so you've got to match up acting right in terms of the things that you would be expected to do, and then acting or trying to act right but just not succeeding. You're trying to act like you care, or you're trying to act nonchalant, and how does that stack up and how does that look? That's really what separates the men from the boys, apparently, in true crime, because some people can't seem to tell the difference between what is acting right and what is suspicious. And it's very obvious that Knox's behavior was very suspicious. It's very obvious. Her own housemate Philomena said that. Celeste said the same thing. The court that handled her case felt the same. So did the police. Were they all wrong? So I'm not going to go into this, but there's a little moment where Knox is at the crime scene, and I think she was asked to put on protective clothing, like sort of plastic booties and so on, and once she'd put it on, she swung around and she went ta-da, right? So she's in a she's been taken back to the crime scene with the police, and she's still trying to be the center of attention in a playful, gay, happy way. And again, it's just somebody that just seems to not appreciate what normal behavior is, right? And yet, here we are 12 years later, and what you will see is you will have Knox chastising other people and telling them what's normal and what's not, and what's reasonable and what's not, and which people should be considered innocent and who shouldn't be. She's now the authority on that. When Lady Gaga says something, Knox will then counter her and say, no, it's actually like this, because Knox is the authority. When Meredith was killed and they're in the corridor, Knox then jumps in to tell everyone that if her throat was effing slit. And Knox is trying to be the authority here on everything, but isn't this about the fact that she's not? That she's goofy and she doesn't know what's going on? So which is it? Is she the authority, or is she goofy? Or is she the goofy authority? Which one is it? So I'm not going to go into any further detail about what the prosecutor was saying about how her behavior was completely inexplicable. I don't really I don't really appreciate the way that he did that or said that. I don't think it's enough for a prosecutor to sort of stand in front of the judge and shrug and say, I don't understand this behavior. I don't think that's good enough. I think the prosecutor needs to get into the mind of the student and say, this behavior that doesn't make sense actually makes complete sense in this particular context, and then you can provide the drug narrative, the sex narrative, the attention seeking narrative, the jealousy and all that kind of stuff. But what the prosecutor does instead is he tells the story from the perspective of an adult, and you can't prescribe a motive in this kind of juvenile situation. You can't prescribe sort of adult psychology to this kind of delinquency. Students don't act like normal people when they're acting up. They act like animals. Same with teenagers. If you want to intuit that kind of thing, you need to intuit through the mind of a teenager or a college kid. And that's also what's missing from the West Memphis 3 case, and to some extent from the John Benet Ramsey case. The right kind of psychology, not from an adult but from the person of the right age. So yeah, I don't quite agree with the whole thing of her behavior was completely inexplicable, but I get why Gladwell highlights it, because he's trying to say that even the prosecutor was confounded, and so that justifies his view. If the prosecutor was confounded, then maybe he's right in making his point. Gladwell then goes on to talk about a trained interrogator that should be adept at getting beneath confusing signals and demeanor and so on. I'm not really going to go into that, but he's trying to make the point that quirky people aren't criminals, and what I can tell you is that very often they are. It's very often the quirky people, the misfits, the bungled and the botched, that are criminals. And you can look at someone like Oscar Pistorius, and you could say, well, he wasn't quirky or bungled and botched. Well, if you take a particular point of view, maybe, but from another point of view, he was a double amputee, and it's not so important what we think of him. Maybe we think of him as an Olympian or whatever. What's more important is how he thought of himself and how he related to the opposite sex given his disability. And you can take someone like O.J. Simpson. He was a black guy operating kind of in a white community, a white society. He had a white wife. One might say that was quirky in a way, and you could argue that it's not quirky, but then in the context of the crime and the whole O.J. Simpson circus, there's that quirky element, and the whole Keeping Up with the Kardashians is a quirky reality show that basically spun out of the quirkiness of the O.J. Simpson thing. So you can go on and talk about certain people and that are involved in crime, and a lot of them do turn out to be quirky. They are essentially outcasts, and they are trying not to be. Another good example is Jodi Arias. Some people might call her quirky, others might say she was dangerous, unhinged, whatever, but she was still an oddball, right? So yeah, we're about to wrap up here. It goes on to say that the Knox case deserves to be retold because it happens all the time. Really? When last were you randomly accused of murder, and then you went on to make a killing, earning a $4 million jackpot deal for your story about you and your boyfriend, how you and your boyfriend were falsely accused, and your boyfriend also got $1 million for his book? The Amanda Knox story happens all the time, really. It doesn't. It doesn't happen all the time. Do the parents of a person suspected of a crime hire a powerful PR company to run interference? Does that happen all the time? Does that happen with every case? Do PR firms hired in every single case? They're not. And I think this is coming to the end of the discussion, and it's interesting that he gives her the last word. It's really fascinating that Gladwell actually gives the mic effectively to Knox, and he gives her the last word on her case. He gives her the last word. Now, if you cycle back to the beginning of this chapter, it starts off, on the night of November 1st, 2001, Meredith Kircher was murdered by Rudy G'day. That's the first sentence. The very last sentence of the chapter is Knox's own words, and it is just the last three words, not objective evidence. Just look at that in context, where you have, it starts off with the murderer of Meredith Kircher was Rudy G'day, and it ends off saying there was no objective evidence against Amanda Knox. Well, you couldn't have done a better job at just grandstanding this person's absolute innocence. You couldn't have done a more simplistic, reductionist, bogus job. This last sentence really it's unfathomable that Gladwell just provides it there as is. He sort of lets her speak for herself, where she says, "There is no trace of me in the room where Meredith was murdered," Knox says at the end of the Amanda Knox documentary. It's just it actually makes me really angry that you have someone writing a book quoting a documentary where the person actually appears, and Knox wouldn't appear in a documentary about her if it didn't suit her. She wouldn't act in a documentary, saying things in a documentary, if it didn't suit her, if what is being said didn't put her in a positive light. And so she's saying here, there's no trace of me in the room where Meredith was murdered. It's not true. There were traces of her in the room where Meredith was murdered. And in the previous episodes we've mentioned the lamp. Is that not a trace of Amanda Knox? The fact that that it's her reading lamp is in Meredith's room. What's it doing there? And if you're also going to make the argument that there's no trace of me, why is so much stuff washed up and cleaned up in the story? Why was Knox and Celeste mopping up on that morning of all mornings, and it's admitted? Why did his home smell of bleach that morning? Why was washing being done that morning? Why did Philomena say that the washing machine was on? Why did Rudy G'day say the same thing? Why did Rudy G'day say that Meredith's clothes, a fresh load of her clothes, were in the washing machine? How could she have loaded the washing machine when she was dead? She died early, or in the evening of November 1st, and the washing machine was found late the next day, late on November 2nd, at like 1 or 2 o'clock, and it's still on. And so Knox goes on saying it's not just that there was no evidence, but you're trying to find the answer in my eyes. I'm gonna get to that in a second. Let's just first deal with this. There's no trace of me in the room. All things being equal, if you were perfectly innocent, wouldn't you have noticed Meredith had gone silent early on? Tried to get a hold of her, and then when you couldn't, found a way to break down her door. Because that is ultimately what happened. Other people, when they realized Meredith was missing, tracked her down. Meredith didn't answer, and they broke down the door. But why did it take somebody else to do that when Knox was staying at the villa? Knox showered at the villa. Everyone else was out of town. Philomena was out of town. Laura was out of town. The guys downstairs were out of town. Knox wasn't out of town. Knox was there. Knox had lunch with Meredith, Knox didn't have lunch with Meredith, but Knox had lunch earlier the day that Meredith died. Knox was in the villa the next morning on her own account, and she took a shower, and so was Solicitor. Again, why, if you're perfectly innocent, why wouldn't you have noticed Meredith was missing? Why wouldn't you have noticed that she'd gone silent? Why wouldn't you have tried to get hold of her? And why wouldn't you ultimately have broken down her door when you had hours and hours to do it? And one of the little stories with this case is that Knox and Celeste said that they woke up at 10 o'clock. But his computer started playing music and skipped certain tracks at 5:30 in the morning. Now you can understand them not trying to trace down Meredith if they got to the house really late. Like if they got to the house at 5 minutes before the police arrived. But from the account that we get, Knox was actually at the house quite early. And so why did it take so long to try to track her down? Why wasn't, even then, in that situation, why was Knox the least concerned of everybody else when she should have been the most concerned? There's blood that she's walking over. There's blood on the basin. Why is she the least concerned of everybody? Why is she more concerned about feces in the toilet than blood? And that also brings us to, you make this claim that there's no physical evidence of me, there's no trace of me in the room. Why isn't there? Why is it that there isn't a trace of you? Why is it that you were there that morning, you admitted you were, and yet there's no evidence of you? Not just, you say there's no trace of me in the room where Meredith was murdered, but just on the murder weapon. And did you forget your reading lamp on the bloodstained floor of Meredith's bedroom? And why would a trace of your boyfriend's DNA be on Meredith's bra if you weren't in the room? Oh, it was contaminated. So which is it? His DNA was on the bra, or his DNA was on the Meredith's bra but it was contaminated? So it was still on the bra. How did it get there? And how come Meredith's bra was cut and Meredith stabbed, and your boyfriend was a knife freak? He was carrying a knife in his pocket on the night he was arrested. If there's no trace of you, but Meredith was assaulted, including a sexual assault, why is there this fantasy rape story where a brother directs his brother to commit a rape? Why are there psychological traces of you within the scene? Why is Meredith's DNA on a knife where your DNA is also on, and the knife is at Celeste's apartment? Oh, that DNA trace isn't reliable. Okay, but that's a different argument to there's no trace of me in the room. You can't say there's no trace of me in the room. You can say there were traces found, but they weren't able to prove that they were traces of me. You can say that. But then you can't say there were no traces of me. And then Knox sort of ends this whole thing off saying, you can't look into my eyes and use that as objective evidence. And as I say, the interesting thing is, the covers I've used for my books, I have used her eyes, because there's so much lying, deceit, PR, bullshitting going on in this particular case, that you sort of want to cut through all that and say, well, just look into this person's eyes. What do you see? You know, there's so much murkiness going on. What's actually going on here? What is actually going on with Amanda Knox? And in a lot of these images, when you look at her eyes, there's not a softness. There's a kind of a severity. Where Knox is not laughing, when you look into those eyes, you see a glint, a cold glint. And what have those eyes seen? So thank you for listening. I've covered a lot of this research in 2 trilogies, Deceit, Dark Matter and Under Suspicion, and another series more dealing with a trial narrative, Despicable, Foxy Noxy Fights Back, and Extradition. I still have 2 narratives left to write. I'm not quite sure when I'm going to get round to them, but one will be dealing with Rudiger Day, the Ivorian, and then there will be a final one, a finale. But anyway, thank you for listening, and please stay tuned throughout the week for coverage on the day by day, 12 years ago today coverage of the timeline. I welcome questions, suggestions, and your feedback. Please subscribe to the channel, please share in your networks, please like and leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.